What's up, guys? Last night had a great night, 4-0. You love to see that with all the money line underdogs cashing as well. Northern Arizona, absolutely no sweat, just wire to wire, pretty much domination, outright victory there. Indiana Pacers, also an outright win there. That one was mostly not even in doubt either, really. They really turned it on late, too, to just really put it away, which was great. And what I forgot to mention in that game was that Indiana also had a couple of key injuries there. They've been without Haliburton for like a week and a half now. So since they'd had so much time without him at that point, I thought that it was not really as relevant. Although of course it's going to impact the number, because probably if he was in the lineup, they probably only would have been like a 4 or 5 point underdog rather than 7.5, 8, whatever it was. But I think I'll end up taking 8 on that game, actually. But yeah, so he was out, but I still liked. I thought it was a horrible spot for the Kings in general, though. And those Indiana, even though they're playing without a couple of starters there, Indiana, they have a lot of scorers on that team, so they have guys that can kind of fill in those roles. But I'll be talking about that in a second as well. And then the hockey games, yeah, Ottawa Senators, real easy. They actually had a goal taken off the board, I think, at the end of the second period, too, that would have made it 5-1. I wasn't watching it, so I don't know what happened, but then it still remained 4-1, and then they just scored in the third period to make it 5-1 anyway. They wound up winning. And then the closest one was the Nashville Predators. But I don't know if they ever trailed in that game. And they hung on for the win as well as an underdog as well. So huge day. Really good. You love to have days like that. It's the best day of the year for me, at least. So that was really good to see. I've had a couple of 5-0, 6-0 days before. It's rare, but it's awesome when it happens. I love that. Today, Friday, it's a shorter card, man. Usually, NBA is usually kind of a stacked Friday card, historically, but it's not really the case anymore. They give these guys more days off and stuff now, and it's just I don't know, there are fewer games on the board. College basketball, I have a couple of ways that I was kind of looking, but I'm just not going to be able to do it in these games. But I wanted to kind of lean against Central Connecticut in the Northeastern Conference, because they just beat Merrimack, who was at the top of the conference and won the conference last year, but they were actually ineligible for the tournament, which is why Fairleigh Dickinson got into the tournament. A lot of people don't know that. Fairleigh Dickinson, because everybody obviously knows they beat Purdue in the tournament. It was an infamous upset, really, but Fairleigh Dickinson didn't even win this conference tournament last year. They got in by default, kind of, because Merrimack is transitioning to D1 and they were ineligible for it. And Merrimack actually beat them in the conference final, which was a game I was on. I love betting that situation. I think Merrimack might have fallen a point short of covering. I don't remember it, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they still covered. I don't remember, but I'm going off on a tangent here, but yeah. So Merrimack did actually win the conference tournament last year. They were ineligible to get into the tournament. And then Fairleigh Dickinson did that crazy thing, man. Fairleigh Dickinson was the worst team in the tournament field last year, too. It's just so crazy that happened. I didn't even expect them to win the first 4 matchup, and they beat Purdue. It's just insane. But Central Connecticut beating Merrimack is a big game there, because they leaped over Merrimack to get into the lead in the Northeastern Conference. They're still undefeated in the conference. Big win. Now they got Lemoyne coming into their house, who I think Lemoyne might be in transition right now, because I don't remember them being in D1. I don't even know who they are, so I don't think they're in D1 recently, and they're hosting this team, and I think they're around an 8.5 point favorite here. But the problem with it is that Lemoyne, they're also coming off a pretty decent game, a decent performance. They're actually coming off back-to-back games that are pretty big, 2 big games in a row. Actually, they beat Fairleigh Dickinson, who's kind of down this year, and then on the road to start conference play. And then they came back home and lost to Merrimack in a very close game, who was leading the conference at the time, lost to them by 4. And then they lost to Sacred Heart, who is right behind Merrimack and Central Connecticut in the conference, and only lost that game by 7. So Lemoyne put up a pretty good performance in that one too. So that's why I can't really get there with Lemoyne. I wish they were not coming off of 2 big games, because Central Connecticut's coming off a big win there. So I think they're in a letdown spot. Lemoyne is still kind of the lean there, but I just can't do it because they're also not in a very good spot. And then what else we got here? We got the other one I was going to comment on was VCU. I think is actually in a good spot to turn it around, even though they're kind of the team that everybody knows because I believe they won the A10 last year. They got into the tournament, but they lost badly to St. Mary's in the first round. But you look at VCU, they came off like a few big games in a row in the A10, losing to St. Bonaventure, who's one of the better teams in the conference. Then they they lost by 2 to George Washington, who is also playing really well in the conference. They're playing well in general. This year, only losing that game by 2 at home. Then they went out on the road and they beat George Mason, who had been playing well in the conference as well and has a pretty good overall record. So 3 like fairly big games in a row there. And then they went on the road for a second straight road game to LaSalle, who's near the bottom of the conference. Not really a good situation there, kind of a like hangover, like letdown-ish spot for VCU after beating George Mason, which was a pretty big win. They went into LaSalle and they didn't perform that well, but they still covered. They escaped against LaSalle with a small win, and they did not cover the number, although they only missed it by a half point. But that might like scare VCU back into focus. And that was a bad spot for them, like I said. So they almost slipped up against LaSalle, but they escaped. And I think that's going to refocus them coming back home. They still haven't won a conference home game yet, hosting St. Louis. And St. Louis is in a worse spot because St. Louis is coming off a game against Dayton where they took Dayton almost to the wire, man. Dayton, the best team in the A10 in the conference, they're ranked. And St. Louis played a really nice game there, and they hung in there at least. They were losing for almost the entire second half, but they hung around, didn't really go away, and wound up losing pretty close in the end there. So I think St. Louis is in a hangover spot there, but this is still a game they're probably going to get up for, though, which is the one problem I have with it is that VCU is still one of the better teams in the A10, and they're a known team there, a known name. So St. Louis still might be able to get up for it. The question is, are they going to like run out of gas, I think, because I don't think it's going to be like a hangover spot when VCU is another one of the better teams in the conference. So that's the one issue I have with it, but I lean to VCU because I think they're going to be motivated to bounce back after a lackluster performance at LaSalle, whereas, like I said, St. Louis is coming off a really tough performance against Dayton. So will they run out of steam like in the later portions of this game? Maybe. VCU's laying a lot, though. Laying 8.5 in that one. So it's a lot to lay. Moving over to NHL. I don't even want to talk about the NHL, really. The NHL's got nothing that I really want to get involved in. It's a very short card, 4 games. I do think Detroit is in a bad spot in the NHL, so I will point that out. Carolina's up from minus 185 to minus 197 on the money line. So you're having to lay a price if you want Carolina. And you might be able to look to lay like a goal line, a puck line, a goal line. A puck line price on them to win by 1.5 goals might be a better approach there as far as like how pricey the number is there. They got 62% of the tickets, but 91% of the cash. So it does look like there is a cash discrepancy on Carolina. I think the spot is worse for Detroit. You look at what Detroit's done recently, man. They're on fire. They've won 6 of their last 7 games, something like that, 3 in a row. And all 3 of those games are pretty good teams. They beat the LA Kings and then went out on the road, won at Toronto with no time off either. That was a back-to-back and a third game in 4 days, and they still went up to Toronto and won. Then they had a couple days off, and they had to go down to Florida, and they won that game in overtime 2 days ago. And now they finish the 3-game road trip in Carolina. I don't know if they're going to run out of steam there after playing a few big games in a row. And even before the LA game, they played Edmonton. 2 days before that, Edmonton is a hot team right now, too, and they played them into overtime and lost. So the question is, are they going to run out of steam? Because I think they will still be focused, if they can be, on a Carolina team that's been doing pretty well. And Carolina has a pretty good record. So I think Detroit still is probably going to bring focus. It's just, are they in a spot where they won't be able to continue the effort throughout the entire game here? Maybe. Carolina's had 3 days off, so they're in the much better rest spot, but I think that's factoring into the line. And prior to that, they lost to the LA Kings, which broke a nice hot streak that they had, where they had won 7 of 8, and then they lost to the LA Kings. Coming off a bad loss and having a few days off, I think is helpful. So I think Carolina's definitely in the more focus and rest spot here, but it is factoring into the line such that I'm not sure if I can quite do it. But people might also look and see that, well, Carolina got smashed by the LA Kings, and the Kings just beat and Detroit just beat the Kings. So if the Kings can smash Carolina, and the Red Wings can beat the Kings, and of course, how are we getting the Red Wings as such a big underdog here? So people might, like recreational guys, if they look at hockey here, they might think that there's some perceived value on Detroit there, but I actually disagree with it. I don't really think so. I think they're in the worst spot, so I would not want to get involved with Detroit in that one. And then moving to the NBA, like I said, it's a short card, man. So there's not a whole lot going on here on this card. I would say the 76ers are probably in a bit of a letdown spot, and they're a 5-point road favorite at the Orlando Magic. 91% of the tickets on them, but 88% of the cash. So 76ers are definitely not really in a good spot. In their last game, they beat the Denver Nuggets, the returning champs. That's a big game. 2 days off since then, though. Now they're starting a road trip, so it is possible that they might carry that momentum, but it also is possible that it's a letdown spot. So I could see this game kind of going both ways. So it's a little bit tough to get involved in it. And it's not a sandwich. They don't have anything else up next. So they have Charlotte next. So if they're going to be focused on one game between either Orlando or Charlotte, it's probably going to be on Orlando. And the problem with Orlando, the biggest problem I have with looking at Orlando here, looking at their side, is that they're returning from a road trip, a 4-game road trip, which wasn't really a long road trip. It went as far as Oklahoma City, but still, it's a 4-game road trip, and I don't really like playing teams coming back from road trips, but it is Philadelphia coming in, so you're probably going to be focused when it's the 76ers coming in. And the Magic just lost to Atlanta, who I think is still way worse than people think they are. Atlanta's historically bad against the spread through 40 games this season. They're 10-30 against the spread, which is the worst team through 40 games in the NBA against the spread in like 30 years. So the numbers still have not caught up to Atlanta, because I think they have Trae Young and some of those other guys that are big names, and they made the playoffs last year. So they're still being lined like they're kind of one of those playoff bubble teams, but I think they're bad. They're like a bottom, like 7 or 8 teams in the NBA, and the number still is not adjusted enough for how bad Atlanta is, I guess. So, but those are my feelings on that one. And then Denver-Boston is definitely a big game. Denver, the other side of that 76ers matchup, where they lost to the 76ers. That was a close battle, man. A TNT game, big step-up game for both teams. Denver now having to go on the road. Celtics are up from 5.5 to 6 with juice. Looks like it's going through the 6, because it looks like the Celtics are going to have the public action on them, because everybody does love the Celtics, even more so than the Nuggets, even though the Nuggets are the returning champs. The Celtics are like the top team in the NBA right now. Celtics 78% of the tickets, but 88% of the cash. They do have the cash discrepancy. I have a slight lean to the Celtics in this one. Denver Nuggets, like I said, they're coming off that TNT battle, but they have had 2 days off since then. But that was a big game, step-up game against Philadelphia. Big effort the whole time. Now this is a second straight road game, having to go to Boston, where Boston is 20-0 straight up on the season. So Boston has not lost a home game this year. And Denver has not played Boston yet this year. So, and this was a potential NBA Finals matchup last year. It almost happened, but the Celtics didn't quite get there. So maybe the Celtics might be a little bit more of the motivated team, because they're facing the returning champs, and the Celtics didn't even make the final last year. So maybe, I don't know, they're going to be playing with a little bit of an additional chip on their shoulder because of that. Maybe Celtics have 1 day fewer rest because they played on Wednesday, but you might say that like half of that game was pretty much rest, because they just blew out San Antonio. That game was like, it was a joke, man. They were winning the game by like 40 points in the second quarter or something like that. And the Celtics, I think they packed it in early, and San Antonio put up a bunch of garbage points and still didn't even cover the number. Celtics wound up winning by 19, I think, as a 16.5-point favorite or something. Easy game for the Celtics, kind of like a momentum carrier type of game where you just continue your momentum into the next game. I think the Celtics are looking ahead to this game. So I expect focus out of the Celtics here, whereas Denver, they're coming off a big game. I mean, they should be focused because it is the Celtics, but it's a second straight big game for Denver, but they do have an extra day of rest in between the two. So I don't know if this is actually going to be a nationally televised game as well. I guess it is. It's an ESPN game. So we'll see about that, but that's the biggest game on the slate. Should be a good game to watch. And then the game that I'm actually going to be on, and I think we might want to wait to see what's going to happen with this game, is I'm turning around and I'm fading the Indiana Pacers after I was on them last night. They were in a good spot last night to catch the Kings, or the Kings are in a really bad spot returning from a road trip, a fairly long road trip. So I faded the Kings. It was a bad spot. Kings are in like a typically distracted spot, and it showed up in that game, man. The Pacers were able to put a lot of points on the board, win the game, as the Pacers do. They do score a lot. They just don't play defense. Pacers sitting at a 5-point favorite, 89% of the tickets and 61% of the cash on them. So nobody wants the Portland Trailblazers here, man. Of course, the Pacers, they have a winning record. They score a ton. So, of course, they're going to be the public team out of the two in this matchup. Who's going to want the Trailblazers, who suck? Nobody wants the Trailblazers. But this is a bad spot for the Pacers. Like I said, they're on a back-to-back. They just beat Sacramento on the road. This is going to be a fifth straight road game, and the road trip took them into elevation. They played tough against Denver after they beat Atlanta to start out the road trip. They've had a packed schedule too, man, since January. Even going back to like January 1st, they've had very few days off. Only the 2nd, 4th, 7th, 9th, 11th, 13th, 16th, and 17th are the only days they've had off since then. So in a span of 20 days, I think they've only had like 7 days off, 6 days off, something like that. This is a back-to-back, but they did have 2 days off prior to yesterday's game. So that gave them a little bit of rest coming into yesterday's game, but now they're playing the back end of a back-to-back after a huge win as like a 7.5, 8-point underdog yesterday in Sacramento. That was a nice big win. It was a nice bounce back from losing to Utah in the back-to-back of the elevation games. Indiana went into Denver and played pretty impressively, only losing by 8, and then they had a stinker the next day on the back end of a back-to-back. After a big performance at Denver, they laid an egg at Utah, so that was on the back end of a back-to-back. Had a couple days off, got back into a good spot, bounce-back spot last night, beat Sacramento for me. Now they're on a back end of a back-to-back again, and they've been putting up stinkers, man. Like I said, you look at the back ends of back-to-backs for them. They only have 2 that are recent. One of them was that really awful game at Utah. The Utah's been playing pretty well, and the other one was a loss to the Celtics. But of course, it is the Celtics. But even so, the back ends of back-to-backs have not been very good for the Indiana Pacers, and this is one of them. And they have Phoenix, Denver, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Memphis, Boston, New York, Sacramento, again, all up next. So this is a down spot in the schedule, man. All their games coming up after this, including Sunday, 2 days from now at Phoenix. All of these games are big, and Phoenix is to close the road trip. All of those games are bigger games than this game here at Portland. This is a down spot in the schedule. It's a back-to-back. It's going to be tough for them to get right back up again after that big effort as an underdog at Sacramento last night. Go into Portland and win again? I don't think so. I think it's a bad spot. And then why I think you should wait on this is that Haliburton might come back in this game. The nice, what are they? Were they an oil company? I don't even know. The oil company. Maybe that should be his nickname. The corporation, Tyrese Haliburton. If he comes back, it's going to impact the line. We're going to get a couple more points of value because if he comes back, it's going to turn this into a reverse injured player theory situation on top of a letdown spot. So that would make me like it even more because if he comes back after like a prolonged absence, he's their star player. They're going to have to work him back in, and it's going to take some adjustment time for that to happen, even though you might say, well, he'll be rested. Yeah, kind of, but he's also working his way back from an injury. So Haliburton, if he comes back, I expect this line probably will move up a little bit, maybe into the 7 range, something like that. So we'd be able to get a better number on this if it happens. So that's why I think maybe you can wait. You got to just keep an eye on the number, man, because you don't want to lose the 5 if he's not coming back. It might drop a little bit throughout the day. So keep an eye on that, on the injury situation. Just as soon as it's announced, you'll see what happens with Haliburton. If he's announced out, you're going to want to grab it, grab the best number you can, obviously. But if he comes back, you're going to get more value on Indiana, I think, because the line's probably going to over-adjust to him returning because he is such a star there. And the other thing about Indiana is they traded for Pascal Siakam. Shaquille O'Neal. No, Shaq. Pascal Siakam. This is going to be his first game. I think it's confirmed he is playing for Indiana tonight. So that's going to shake up their lineup too. He's like kind of a key like offensive component here. I think he's probably going to be a starter, especially because they have injuries. So they're down some starters. He's a guy who's going to be in the mix and going to be another scorer for them. And people are going to think, well, yeah, that's going to make them an even more like lethal offensive team. That's true in the long run. But when you get like a pretty big, like key component to your starting lineup, it takes a while for him to learn like what your team does and get involved in the system, man. So throwing him in there, I think is going to cause like, it's going to have more of a jarring aspect to it right away. Like they're not going to have chemistry like right away. Like I went against the Clippers when they first got James Harden because it takes a little while to like get that chemistry of that new guy there. So I think that's going to shake up their lineup as well. And I don't think that's a positive right away with Shockham in there. I think it might, also cause like some chemistry issues there. So I like a lot of these aspects. It's a lot of angles I look for coming into play here. And the market read looks like it's on the Portland side as well. So a lot of factors that make me not like Indiana here. That's what I'm doing. In Portland, I think it's good that they won. They played 2 days ago and they won against Brooklyn, and they lost 4 games in a row before that. But they were all to good teams, to the Knicks, Oklahoma City, Minnesota. All of those were on the road, and then they returned home from a long road trip. It's not a good spot returning home from a road trip just in general, and they lost to Phoenix. And then they had a nice bounce back with 2 days off in the second straight game back home after a clunker in the first game. They were in a good spot in that second game from the return home after a bad game in the first game. That tends to be a positive spot. They beat Brooklyn. They only beat them by 2, but I think that's going to start some new momentum after they were playing pretty poorly with 4 losses in a row. Even though, like I said, they were all the good teams. It was a lot of blowout losses really in there. So beating Brooklyn might like start some momentum for them, some winning momentum. And I think they'll pay attention to Indiana. They have a team with a pretty good record coming in, even though they have the Lakers on deck on Sunday. I don't think they're going to overlook a Pacers team that scores a lot and has a pretty good record and coming into their house. When you're 11-29, I don't know if you're really going to be overlooking anybody. So I like the fact they had a close win against Brooklyn in their last game. Brooklyn's not a very good team. That was a close game. It was still an upset win for Portland, but I think that might start some momentum for them. So I think it's a bad spot for Indiana here and a better spot for Portland with the day rest at least, and the better momentum spot for Portland, whereas Indiana's in a letdown spot, and they have some lineup changes that could potentially be jarring in the first game coming into this one. So at least the Shockham one, and we'll see if Haliburton comes back too. We'll get an even better number on the Portland Trailblazers here. So as it stands right now, it's the Portland Trailblazers +5. We'll see what happens with this. We might be able to get a better number with Haliburton back if he does indeed return in this game. So you got to be watching this number all day, man. But that's going to be the only play today. Have a good one. Enjoy the Friday. Kick off the weekend in the right way, man. Peace.